It's about 2:30, and we're here to talk about making accessible PDFs. My name is Dawn Watkins. I currently work with JP Morgan Chase, but the sponsor here at this event and my previous employer is Site Improve, and they asked me to go ahead and come and speak on this topic for them. I do have one announcement for this afternoon. Developing a Cloud Warrior at 4:15 in Birmingham is now going to be 3 social media legal threats every web professional must defend their agency from. And then developing a Cloud Warrior was moved to tomorrow from 1 to 2:15 in Birmingham. So if that was one you were interested in going to, just make a note. All right, so there's a couple parts about making accessible PDFs. I want to focus on the part that you guys are going to get the most value out of. So we're going to focus on the Adobe Acrobat part, and I'm going to do a little bit of demonstration related to that. But I'm going to go over a little bit of background information first. And one thing you really need to know, whether you're a content contributor or somebody who's posting PDFs online or whatever, the accessibility starts way back in the originating document, right? So if you're creating it in Microsoft Word, InDesign, Google Docs, Mac Pages, all of those have different levels of accessibility support. So how many people in here are mainly authoring from Microsoft Word? Okay, and who's authoring from InDesign, Adobe InDesign? Okay, is anyone authoring from Google, Google Docs, Mac? Okay, that happens a lot in universities for like professors and stuff. So those have a little less accessibility. So if you can get people to move over to Microsoft Word or InDesign, it's better supported. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so basically when I say Microsoft, it's the whole Microsoft Office. They all have the same support, and I'll go through what that looks like as a first start. But we only have like an hour and a half, right? So I'll try and keep it. We only have an hour, really. Anyway, so basically with digital inclusion, the reason we're doing this is for ADA. Well, we're doing this basically because we want people to be able to get into our documents and be able to use them. But the backing of that starts with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. Now, while it doesn't specifically cover digital, it does say, like the very first sentence, and I'm paraphrasing, is make stuff work for everybody. So when you look at lawsuits that have happened related to web and digital accessibility, they fall on both sides of the line. Sometimes a judge or court will say that it's digital and that's not specifically stated in ADA, so they'll let you go, and other times they will. So it's just better to, number one, it's about usability and we want everybody to get to it, so that's where we're going with that. And then it's also part of Section 508 specifically, so if that kind of falls under you, that's what we're doing. But then there's one other one that people don't know about as much. It's called PDA UA, or PDA Universal Accessibility. It's a whole bunch of things that line up a lot parallel to WCAG, but there are some differences. So, just jot this down and at your leisure, read the hundreds of pages of related regulations about that. Basically, what I'm going to be talking about today is following more of the WCAG guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I'm just going to go over this in general. Basically, it has 4 principles, perceivable, operable, understandable, robust. It's broken down into guidelines, and then those guidelines are broken down into levels. In general, you're aiming for level AA. Some people think that means they only have to adhere to the ones under AA, but it really means you have to do all of A and AA. So just keep that in mind. Now, when we look at our documents, here is the list of things to have as your checklist, okay? You want to be using styles. If you're not using styles already, and I'll give an example of what that looks like. Lists are very important. Those give valuable information to assistive technology users, screen reader users. Your images need to have alt text. Your hyperlinks need to be clearly visible and interactable. Your colors need to adhere to color contrast ratios. And then tables need to be for data table structure. You shouldn't be using tables for page layout. There is one little asterisk there if you're developing forms, because forms are almost impossible to develop without tables, and there's a whole bunch of extra stuff you have to do to make that accessible. Then there's some structural elements, meaning like if you add headers and footers, if you have tables of contents, Those are all helpful and will convert over to Adobe. And then finally, document properties, which often gets overlooked, but we'll talk about those. So this is your checklist. Memorize it. Create a cheat sheet for it. First, I want to talk about styles. So your styles in any of the Microsoft Office products are the ones that, here, I'll show you. It's better. It's easier to see it than to just look at it like that, right? So it's up here, this bar. Oop, where'd it go? Hello. Let me try replugging it. I think it's because it was in that PowerPoint mode thing. No. Did you just get a picture of my failure? Thank you. I know. How do I get it over there? What's going on? Let me try and shut this down. Jay, how do I get this to be on my regular screen and not my extended screen? Any ideas? I don't want to restart everything. Is it under display? Sorry, guys. It was working a minute ago.
Did you duplicate the display?
I think I did. How do I undo that?
And that's actually what you want.
Oh, yeah?
You don't want it extended, you want it to duplicate.
Okay. Let me unplug this again. Maybe it just needs to reset. Dang it. See? I see it. You don't see it. Okay. Probably. Anybody? Application has stopped working. Sure. I don't care.
Are you in your display center?
Yeah, I'm trying to get into it. It's the NVIDIA control panel says it stopped working, which could be part of the problem.
Sure.
So you can use my pad and you can just draw.
You're so helpful. Okay, yeah, close. I mean,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
like your display
Okay.
panel has stopped.
All right, well,
I don't
let's.
know, you may have to
Yeah.
restart.
I don't want to restart. It takes forever. Okay, let's get back where we were. See if this works. Let's go back to looking at it. Sorry, guys. It's weird. Okay. Yeah, but it's only when I'm in the PowerPoint thing. Okay. So when you're in Microsoft Word, and hopefully you guys all have a version of Microsoft Word on your computers in front of you, it'll be easier to see. There's a section called Styles. Styles includes your headings, your paragraph markers, title. It can include hyperlink stylings, list stylings, all kinds of stuff like that. You want to use that. If you're not using it now, please start. The reason is multifold. One is that it's going to save you so much time in the long run, because anytime you decide to change your mind about how you want your headings to look or your titles to look or whatever, all you do is change it in the styles and boom, it automatically goes throughout your whole document. But additionally, you can build in spacing in styles. If you are using manual returns to create spacing in your document, just realize that every one of those manual returns is read by a screen reader. So if you manually return 15 times to get to page 2, someone has to read through each one of those blank spaces to get to page 2. And oftentimes, they will give up after several blank spaces because they have no idea how much further it's going to take to get to the next page. So don't add that extra space that way. Use your styles to add that space. Styles can have, you can have a buffer above, below, all kinds of stuff like that. Change the line weight. So be using styles, please. Also, the other benefit is that there's this little option under references in Microsoft Word. It has a section called Add References, and you can add a table of contents. You can add a table of contents to your document in literally 2 seconds because it will pick up the heading levels that you already assigned in the document and it'll make it into a table of contents. Extra benefit, those all become hyperlinks when you convert over to PDF. So you've just saved somebody a whole bunch of time and effort trying to get through your document. It is recommended by the PDF UA standards that if you have a document over 20 pages, that it have a table of contents. I personally believe that if you have a document over 4 pages, it should have a table of contents. If you have a newsletter, anything, give somebody in the front of the document how much information they have to get through. You know, it's kind of like having a navigation structure on your website, and it helps people to understand what's in that document. Remember, if we're able to look at it visually, we get to see all those breaks and see how, see what's going on. Without that, it's best to give them those shortcuts. So, use styles when you can. Any questions about styles? Anybody using styles already? Yay! All right, I want to see more hands next year. Any questions about styles that I didn't cover? Anything not make sense there? Thanks, great question. InDesign has another set of styles. They're called paragraph styles and character styles. So styles is a word you need to just get embedded in your brain. It is carried through most of the different document creation platforms. InDesign and Microsoft Office leverage them the best. And then the other ones, Google, Mac, have them as well. They're just not leveraged as well. So definitely remember styles. Okay. Next, we have font choices. Font choices make a big difference when presented online. One of the things to know is that this is all from a study I read, so if you are reading on paper, serif fonts, the ones in the middle, the ones that have the little decorative edges, those are easier to read when you're reading print materials. But apparently when you're reading online, it's easier to read sans serif fonts. They are cleaner, doesn't have as much distraction for the eyes. And additionally, they are better for folks with dyslexia. So dyslexia is a huge audience out there that's, not documented all the time because some people don't even know that they have that. So if you can present your information in a nice sans serif font for the body content, that's best. You can use serif fonts and decorative fonts as your headers, but just make sure that they're big enough to be able to read. You're not trying to make a decorative font at a size 12. That can be very difficult for someone to read, especially if they have a learning disability. And then the other thing to keep in mind, at the bottom here, I'm showing 2 examples of fonts, Verdana and Arial. Verdana and Arial are both sans serif fonts. Verdana allows for a more consistent sizing between all of the letters, so it spaces out a little more, which again is better for the online reader, better for someone with dyslexia. The Arial font is more condensed, and it's a little bit harder for someone to read. So keep that in mind when you're picking versions of these fonts that are called narrow or condensed. What you're doing is you're even condensing those more. You're taking the spaces between those letters, squeezing them even more, and it's harder to read. Okay? Making lists, just make sure you're using the actual list options instead of doing, we've probably all seen this as web developers or people making documents that people will manually space over 10 times, or they'll put in a dash and create their own visual spacing, but there's no code behind it that makes it look that way, right? And so with no code behind it, it's not going to be presented to screen reader users the correct way. When a screen reader user encounters a list, they hear, you have encountered a list with 5 items. So it gives them an idea of what they're about to do. So we want to be able to present that to them through the numbered list, the unordered list, all that. So please use those. With images, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about image alt text because we could be there forever. But basically just in the Microsoft Office, in InDesign, not so much in Google and Mac pages, there's a way to put alternative text for all of your images. So be using that. And if I can get the thing to work, I will demonstrate how we do that in Microsoft Word. And I'm sorry that that's not working. There are functional images. This is when you have an image that's actually linked. You don't have to put in alternative text for functional images. You also don't have to put in alternative text for decorative images, but you do have to go into the description field within Microsoft Word and put in open quotes and close quotes with nothing in between it. I know it sounds silly, but basically it's considered the null value. You're giving these items a null value. So when I say you don't have to put alternative text, I'm not saying you get to leave it blank, because when you leave it blank, it's going to create errors for you on any automatic checker, and it's also going to create errors for your users. Okay, so if you are, I wish I could get to Microsoft Word. So if you're in Microsoft Word, you can right-click on an image. It'll pull up image properties or image format. And within there, there's an icon that looks like kind of a, yeah, and then add all text. Okay. Now, one thing to note in Microsoft Office, that area has two fields, one called a title and one called a description. Don't use the title field. The title field gets eliminated when you transfer it over to Adobe PDF. Always use the description field. Okay. Sorry that I don't have an image. Oh, wait, I do. Yay, look. Okay. So this is what it looks like. Don't use the title field, use the description field. And it looks like it's under this little box here under Format Picture. Hey, look at me, I took screenshots. Any other questions about images? Okay.
I know you said you weren't going to get into naming, but what is the best nomenclature for like a chart type of?
That's a really great question. So with charts, you have to have two levels of detail. First, in the alt text, you're going to do a summary of whatever the chart is explaining. If it's over the last 5 years, we've seen a growth of 20%. It's really just general, and it's very basic. But then you have to provide all of the data points that went into that chart somewhere else. And especially if we're in a document, either it's going to be on the same page, or it can be in the appendix at the end of the document, but it needs to exist there. Okay?
What do you do, what do you do with like site plans?
Oh, right. So in that case, well, anything that is super visual and hard to describe, all of us are having to work through a weird kind of balance of how do I give you enough information but not be too overwhelming or whatever. So again, I like to try and use if you can is there a way to summarize in general what's happening in the image, and then somehow get them the rest of it, right? Go ahead, ma'am.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Are you familiar at all, or have you heard about how do you partner with your public works or community planning and development or development services with people who are creating engineering documents, like these site plans? Some of them are
Right.
incredibly layered. How do you get that kind of information?
Definitely.
And you're kind of disconnected.
Great question. So her question basically is, when you're working with a third party, how are you going to get them to get the information that you need for your resources in these documents and on your website, whatever? Best thing I can say is, if you're in contracting phase with any of these people, put that in the contract immediately. Say, with anything you provide us, you're going to provide us with a text description. Start all the way back there, have it in writing somewhere. If that doesn't exist already, then you just have to be really nice and bring them cookies or butter them up in some way to say, this is what I need from you in order to do my job. And I mean, the example I have is that I worked with investment people. Same way, it would be a crazy chart that said 14 different things. One, we had to negotiate to figure out how we could create those graphs into separate items. They wanted to put it all into one so that they could see all the visual things overlaying. We had to talk about how we actually needed it in separate graphs. And so it's just that kind of balance where you're having to figure out what's best for your users and then leverage what you can. So I hope that helps. Anybody else? Images? Okay. So the other one on the list was hyperlinks. Now, hyperlinks have 3 parts to them. I want us to understand all of them, okay? First, text to display. So this is when you're in Microsoft Word and you have gone to the Insert Hyperlink button, and it pulls up this little box, options box. The 3 items I have in red are the 3 areas we need to focus on. text to display, that's the text that's going to show up on the page, right? That's the same as if you were to create a hyperlink online. This is the description of the link. The address field, obviously, is where you're going to put the address. One note I will make is please make sure that you're putting in the full address, include HTTP, start from the very beginning. Some people tend to start with www or even start with Amazon.com and don't have the rest of it. The problem that can happen when you do that is through the transfer process of it going into a PDF and then it being uploaded online, those links break if you don't have the full link. So please make sure you're using the full URL. Finally, the part that gets overlooked, oh, sorry, I was leaning on my keyboard. The part that gets overlooked is target, okay? It's this item over here called target frame. This little area. So when that pops up, you get a drop-down option. And what it is asking you is how is this item going to open up once it's online? Okay? There's several options. One is, well, there's really two, basically. We all know. One is open up in the same window, and and the other is open up in a new window. Now, whether it opens up in the same window or a new window is really up to you and your user's experience and how you want them to experience this document. Do you want it to open up in a new window so that they can't get back to this page? Do you want it to be in the same experience so they're able to go backwards and forwards? Up to you. But you need to make that determination here so that it is communicated to your assistive technology users. Okay? So 3 parts to hyperlinks. Any questions on hyperlinks?
I do. We have historical data on our website for council meetings, whatever.
Right.
Those links become obsolete after a period of time. Do we go back and do anything?
So technically, I'm about to fry myself. Technically, a broken hyperlink in a PDF can be just as damaging to your reputation as a broken link on a web page, because people then feel that, well, in this case, they're going to feel the right thing is that this is old information and it's out of date and you haven't looked at it in a while, so let's not worry about the links. You can provide some kind of information on your website that before they get into this document that says you might experience broken links, blah, blah, blah. But to be fair, people can get to those documents by Google searches, so they might not see that information. So again, it's really up to you as to how you want to make sure your user feels confident in the information you're providing them, right? But if it's a document that you're having out there that's a little more recent, I would still say you should audit those links from time to time to make sure they're still working, especially if you're referencing anyone that's outside of especially when you have a redesign and stuff changes completely, but anybody else you're referencing, their websites can change at any time too. So it's kind of just if you wanted them to have that resource at one time, maybe you want them to have it forever. I don't know. So it's really about, but it's a balancing act of, do you go back to documents that you had out there 5 years ago? And one of the ways we combated that is, and not everybody can do this, so put that out there. We said that no documents on our website would be older than 2 years. Everything older than 2 years would get behind the firewall, and then people would have to open route requests for it, because we didn't want to have information out there that was broken or old. So that's the only thing I can suggest. Is that okay? I mean, I know it doesn't really help.
We had a newly elected mayor. Mm-hmm. Now, we had got it down to 3 years. Now he said, nope, we're going back 10, 15 years. Right.
I know. Yeah, so you can possibly, it doesn't, there's all of my options are going to mean that you would need to go back into the documents in some way. Either you go back and you fix the link, or you go back and in the top you add a note that says this document is over than so many years and we can't guarantee whatever. But just so you could tell your users what they're expecting is the best I could suggest. And we had a question here and in the back, so yes, sir.
From a compliance standpoint, is a broken link an accessibility problem or a usability problem, since the usual guys get the same problem?
Good point. He asks, is a broken link a usability or accessibility problem because everybody's getting the same broken link? I would say that, WCAG would it doesn't specifically, I mean, it does say your link should work, right? But it's more, you're right, it's more about usability because you want your customer to have a good experience and to get the information you linked to. So it falls in both, I think. Yeah. And then, ma'am, you had a question in the back?
I noticed in my Microsoft Word, I don't even have the option to choose a target from, so I was wondering.
Oh. So the good news is so we are eventually talking about PDFs, right? So this is, we're trying to do as much as we can in the Word document so that when we get over to the PDF, we don't have to do a lot of work. So if you can't do it in your native, if you can't do any of these things in your native program, there are ways to do it in PDF. It's just harder. So I'll just put that out there. All right, any other questions about links? Okay. Color contrast. There are color contrast checkers out there everywhere. Hopefully you guys are applying them to your branding guidelines, and you definitely should be using them in your documents where you're making sure the colors work for everyone. These are just some examples of good and bad. Yellow on a, white text on a yellow background is very non-compliant. It's at a 1.07 ratio. Orange, which most of us may be able to see just fine, the white text on the orange background is a 2.5 ratio, and the ratio should be 3.5 for most text and 4.5 for others. But basically, if you have to work with orange, I'm sorry, it's a very hard color to work with compliance. And then on the other side, we have two compliant examples, yellow on blue and a dark gray on white. So, like I said, there are checkers out there. You can check your color combinations. Nowhere in Microsoft Word or InDesign or Adobe is it going to be able to check your colors for you. That's always going to be a manual thing that you have to check. So keep that in mind. So it's best to, I like to create a branding guideline and then a template that everybody in the agency would use or everybody in the organization would use so that they can't go off script and use crazy colors. Okay, now we're talking about tables. Tables need to have a header row. So if you're in Microsoft Word or in InDesign, you're able to create what's called a header row. Now, this doesn't say, obviously, well, what I would love it to say is, header row for accessibility or whatever. Instead, it just says repeat as header row at the top of each page. And this is under table properties, and you would select the entire row that you want to repeat. And by clicking that, you have made it the header row. And the header row will transfer over into PDF and transfer over when you go online. The one thing I should note is this option is only available in the rows. So you cannot create a column header as well. So if you have a complex table that has key information on the first column on the left side and across the top row, you're going to have to add that in Adobe PDF. And again, it can be done, it's just a little more complicated. Any questions on tables? Okay. All right. So within Adobe, this is under the Edit Actions screen in Adobe InDesign. There is an Adobe InDesign Accessibility Touch-Up. Basically, it's an automated tool that checks for, it's one of those action wizards things that checks for as much as it can as far as accessibility. So a lot of the things we just talked about, it's going to check for before you transfer it over into PDF. And Microsoft Office, all of the Office products, also has a accessibility checker. If it's not available in your ribbon, because for some people it's already in your ribbon, you can just go to the help search and start typing the word accessibility, and the checker will come up and you can add it to your ribbon. Okay? All right.
That was only in InDesign or not in Word?
This one is in InDesign, and then this one is in all Office products.
Okay.
So you could do that in Excel and PowerPoint. Yes, ma'am? This one is under the Actions menu in InDesign. Okay. Alrighty. So now we've done all the checks we can. We've done as much as we possibly can in the originating document. The items that we would want to think about adding are the table of contents, adding any bookmarks, headers and footers, and then document properties. Note about headers and footers. in Microsoft Word, when you transfer it over into Adobe, headers and footers automatically become archived because it sees that as repetitive information and it doesn't think that the user needs it. So if you are conveying important information in your header and footer that you would want somebody to know, you're going to have to do a couple little extra steps when you're over in Adobe, okay? Also, according to WCAG guidelines, having page numbers is, well, I'm not going to say required, but it's best practice in your PDF. And according to PDF UA guidelines, it says having footers and headers archived is the best way to go. So just kind of go with your gut there on which one you think is more valuable for the user. And then document properties, but not a lot of people use this one, and it's very interesting because it carries a lot of weight. Some people think that a file name is the same as a document title, and it is not. And you wouldn't want it to be. I mean, some of us probably have these weird rules about how we're supposed to save files based on the date that we edited it and the name of the 4 people who reviewed it and what version number it is, and that's not going to be valuable to anybody but people inside your organization. So that's your file name, and this is where you would designate your actual document title. Now, how do you get there? It depends on which version of Microsoft Word you're using. Basically, look for the document properties. Sometimes it's under the File menu. Sometimes it's an extra little pop-up box. But all of these things exist. And I highly recommend that you include the title. The subject is not so necessary. The author is nice. And if you use keywords down at the very bottom, those will be factored into search engine optimization. So that's going to work both on your own site search. It's also going to work on Google's search. And that title that you put there, that's what's going to come up when it pulls up into Google, and you know how Google makes the name of the document and puts in a little parentheses PDF, and then it has the little blurb about the intro of whatever the document is. That's where that comes from. So if you're seeing your documents come up in Google search with weird names like 1123.5-DW.DOCX, that's because this field has not been filled out. And also it would fail, this is a literal WCAG criteria. So the other item is that within here in the custom area, there's a little bitty option for language. Oftentimes, once you set the language, it's going to keep setting the language from then forward. But the reality is if you've never set the language, it won't have a language in there. So it will continue to make your documents with no language attribute. It would be the same as having an HTML web page with no language attribute out on the web. It isn't going to, it's not going to bring down your website or anything, but it can cause a problem for people who are visiting your site using assistive technology who maybe are speaking in a different language than you are. So if your website is in English and they come with a German speak reader, it's going to try and read the whole site in German. So look for that. Also another WCAG guideline. And I just wanted to say, always, 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 your most accessible type of file is going to be HTML. So if you can post things as HTML instead of a Word document or a PDF, it's just better for the user. But I know we can't always do that, so just throwing that out there. All right, so now that we've gotten our document all the way and we've done absolutely everything that we can do to it, we're ready to turn it over into a PDF. Never, ever, ever use the print to PDF option. If anybody is using that in here, please stop immediately. Have a nice campaign at your office to have nobody ever do that, because what happens is it turns all that wonderful work that you did in that document and it turns it into an image. You've now changed your Word document into a PDF image file. And an image file stinks for most people because, number one, there's nothing there. You've probably run across these files where It looks like it's a scanned document. If you try and take your mouse and you try and highlight some text out of it, you can't because it doesn't exist. It's basically an image. Well, that's what a screen reader or assistive technology user would encounter is nothing but an image, so there would be no information in the document. So do not do that. Instead, what we need to do is either use the Adobe PDF Maker that's available from that same area where you go to save, or you might have an option called Export to PDF. You could have Save to PDF. There's like 3 different ways to get a PDF generated from your Word document. If you can work with your IT department to get the one that is the Adobe PDF Maker, it's the best because it gives you this little option. And you'll note the first time you go to it, for most people, that box isn't checked, which stinks because all the PDFs you made before this point are still not greatly accessible. They're close, but they're not great. And basically what this dot says is enable accessibility and reflow with tagged Adobe PDF. The key word we're thinking of there is tagged, okay? We want our PDF to be a tagged PDF. Okay, why isn't that automatically checked? I have no idea, but it probably should be, forevermore, okay? So now we've finally gotten over into PDF, and I'm sorry that I don't get to do the demonstration, but characteristics of an accessible PDF include a logical structure and reading order, includes all that stuff we did from the Adobe. It includes navigation like bookmarks and table of contents. And then, of course, you can also add restrictions to PDF if that's something that can limit the ability for printing and copying and editing if you're concerned about that. And now that we've gotten it over into PDF, the first thing we want to do, does everybody have Adobe Acrobat Pro or Adobe Acrobat DC? Hands? Yes. Okay, that's what you need to do all the final steps. If you only have the Adobe Acrobat Reader, you're not going to be able to do any of these things. So make sure that you get a license for Adobe Acrobat Pro or DC. They're very similar, just their interfaces look a little different, but they do a lot of the same stuff. First thing is we're gonna use the accessibility tool. There's a tools menu within Adobe Acrobat Pro and DC. You want to pull up. There's one option called Make Document Accessible. So clear, so simple. Pull that one up, and it's going to walk you step by step by step through everything that you need to do in that document to finalize it. It's going to make sure that you have those document properties that we talked about, including the title and the language. It's going to have a couple items where it just puts a little question mark next to them. It'll put little green checks next to everything you got right, and then it's going to put a little question mark next to a few of them, like reading order, that basically means, hi, I'm a machine. I can tell that your document needs order, but I don't know if it's in the right order because I didn't create it. So you, as a person, need to go and verify that. And that's going to be a manual step. It's always going to be manual, okay? Basically, if you ever laid out a document in multi-columns, if you've ever had anything that you've had a call-out box that comes up in the middle of text, you've had anything that disrupts just logical reading order from left to right, you need to make sure that it is in the correct order in your Adobe PDF. And that involves what we call tags and the reading order panel. Those are the two things I want you guys to write down and memorize. You want the reading order panel and tags. Now, we already did a lot of work in our Microsoft Word document, so when we pulled it over, our tags should be pretty great. We should have gotten a lot of stuff done there that's going to make it really easy for us to know that everything's in order. And then sometimes the reading order will go a little wonky. All we have to do is drag and drop to get things in the correct order, so those are good. You'll also have to verify that all of the images have text or have that null attribute that I told you about, open quote, close quote. In Adobe, you also have the ability to literally archive things. But the reason why we want to put the open quote, close quote from the beginning is that way you don't have to go through all of those images in Adobe and do that. So, but if you did find one that was hanging out there where it wasn't supposed to, you can get it out and archive it. And then you can do any final PDF table assigning and then review and correct the reading order. And I'm going to try one more time to see if we can't get this thing to work. Because it's so much better to see it. Is there a way that I can throw it over there? Oh, hi! There we go.
See it's expanding.
There we go. Okay, thanks, guys. All right, so first I wanted to show you what a image file looks like. So here's me with my cursor, and I'm trying to select this text, and I'm getting a box, but that's not a text box, so it's not, in other words, none of that text exists. So this is just an image. When I click on it, it outlines the edges of the image. That's all just an image. So I can read it, but anyone with assistive technologies can't. Now, our second version of a PDF is this one, and I stole this online. So if you are here from the state of Arizona, I apologize for borrowing your document. So I'm going to reduce it just a little bit. Okay. So here we have our document, right? And then I was talking to you about the order panel. So here's tags. This is a document that came over with no tags whatsoever. So, but the good news is it does have, the text is there. I can select it. But it has no tags. Because it has no tags, nothing is going to be read by the screen reader user. If one of your items is not in this tagged field, it doesn't exist to assistive technology. It's basically blind to it, okay? And then the other panel we want is the, yes ma'am?
So because it's OCR, does not mean that it can be read by a reader?
Optical character recognition is what she's asking about. So with that first item that I had that has no information in it, I can use what's called optical character recognition for it to recognize the text in the document. Sorry, I'm trying to do this from a long way away. So here's the action that I was telling you about. Under Action Wizards, I have a Make Accessible button. And so if I click on that, oops. Come on. There we go. Okay. Now it's going to walk me through those steps I was telling you about. And there's one called, there it is, Recognize Text OCR. So if I do this one, I'll just go ahead and start it, right? Hello. Hello. Did I break it? Oh, I think I did. Okay, so basically, if my computer would start, it would go through add document description, set open options, and then it would go to recognize text. Anytime a machine recognizes text for you, it's going to have issues. Even though we see that this is very straight content, it looks really like, why would it have a problem? Like, none of these words are crooked, like it should be able to get everything perfectly. But it's not very smart, and its vocabulary is pretty minimal. So if it comes across a complicated word, it's going to try and break it up into shorter words. And it'll add spaces in weird places. And the formatting that we have here, where it runs, it'll put manual returns in each of the ends of the sentences. So now I do have text that exists, and as a sighted user or as somebody who wanted to select that text, I can do it, and it's going to convert over and come over fine. But for a screen reader user, it comes out as garbage. This just comes out really bad. And you can tell that it comes out as garbage if you go over to the tabs, the tags area, and you'll be able to see exactly what text it found in that. Now, add to that if it was an actual scanned document and it was crooked by even, 1%, the I's and the L's and the number ones all start to look the same to the computer, and it starts putting in all kinds of weird stuff. So if you can avoid using optical character recognition, I would recommend it. I would say it probably gets between 75 and 85% of it right. But even though it's right, it has weird spacing issues, hard returns, and it would just generally be very hard for somebody to get through. Because basically it's trying to it's trying to interpret text from within an image. It doesn't know how any of this is formatted. It has no headings. It has nothing.
Only choice you have, though.
Yeah. Oh, if it is the absolutely only choice you have, it's better than an image, because an image has nothing. So yeah, it's a step in the right direction. And when I realize now, well, I'm stuck, is because this little pop-up box was there. Recognize text asks you language, is sampling size. And once I do that, boom, it's doing its little job. And then when I go, I still don't have tags. Hold on. Oh, add text document. There is. Okay. So add text to document. So that's not cool. I used the add text to document. It has a little green check mark box next to it. There's no tag in the document. So that could be a glitch. That could be, based on the file I'm using or whatnot. But, what we did was we OCR'd it, and then it wasn't able to create any tags. So let's look at a document that we can see tags on, which is the other one.
Back to the actually, what I understood your question to be.
Yeah.
But on a document that you can highlight, even though you can highlight it and it doesn't have any tags, the screen reader won't read that?
It will read it. It would be like if you went to a web page and somebody took out all of the CSS and it was just literally the content all in text. That's what they would be able to read. So there would be no clear breaks. There would be no way for them to get through the document very easily. They wouldn't have the headings to be able to jump through. The links wouldn't be formatted, none of it. So that's where the tags came in. So on this one, where's my cursor? Okay. On this one, we have no tags available, and if we run our tool, this one was not an image to begin with, so it should be better. Accessible. Okay. Oh, nope. Okay. Thanks, guys, for being patient. Okay. And where are you?
Is this doing the same thing as the full accessibility check in DC?
Yes.
Okay. It just looks different.
Exactly. This is an older version. English. We'll detect figures. Okay. So right now it's having me, I'm doing the thing and it tells me there are 2 images in the document. And so this is through the auto. It's telling me, hey, you either need to tell me this is a decorative image, it has a little box here, or you need to give me the alt text. And so in this case, I would put, I would put more information than this, but, logo is what this first one is. And then, so here's a good example. Here, it's telling me I have an image. I don't see a single image on this page. Don't know where it is. It's possible that when somebody created this document, they used maybe a background image that they put as a watermark, or they put in a space somewhere, and they used an image for it, but don't know where it is. So I would just mark this as decorative because it's not helpful.
That's what I'm trying to
You can get rid of it in the tags tree once you have tags. So let's see here. Where are my tags? Oh, sorry. Here's the other thing. I've got 2 screens. It's driving me crazy. There we go. So this is what you were talking about. Now I'm to the accessibility checker part, and with it, it tells me all the green marks are the ones I got right. The question marks are ones that I need to look at, like reading order and title failed. So when you right-click on it, it gives you the option to fix it. So you can just go in, and it pops up another little window that looks very similar to what we saw before: table, subject, author, keywords, and then you would just uncheck these leaves as is and put it in. So in this case, title. Okay, and then so now I did it and it passed to green. It says color contrast needs to be checked. It talks to me about my alt images because, one of them is an archived and it wants to make sure. It talks to me about headings. And then when I go back to my tags, I do have tags in the document now, okay? So each one of these, if I click here, each one there's the figure, there's the paragraph for state of Arizona, then there's the paragraph marker for the address field, and then so on and so on, okay? And this all came over from Microsoft Word, it's just that the person didn't select that little make tagged option. So I wouldn't have had to go through this step if they had select that make tag option. And then the question was, fixing, right? So fixing is difficult, but can be done, because with all of these, you have the ability that you can go in here and add a new tag. So if you decided that you wanted to fix all that stuff we saw before, you could use the add tags to make it a header, make it a whatever you would like, and it'll add it all to the this tag list. But takes a lot more time than it does to start out with an accessible document. Did that answer that question? Okay.
Is there a way to fix it, so it says tag content failed? So you would literally have to go in and tag everything in Acrobat?
Yes, and you can do that in the reading order panel. And sometimes it's already showing, sometimes it isn't. If we go to the accessibility panel, and then we go over to close this. Okay, so in this accessibility checker, underneath tools,
I have an auto tag document.
you do?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how good it is.
Well, again, it's an automated thing, so it doesn't always get it right. Sorry, guys. So there is an order panel. Isn't it what? Pages? Here, maybe.
I have one that's called reading options.
Yeah. What's this one? Bookmarks, documents.
Yeah, and there's one,
Normally.
there you go, order.
Yeah,
That's it.
There it is. Sorry, I'm looking at it sideways. This tells us what order our items are in. Before we saw just the tag tree, and this tells us or order. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Here you can see it looks like it did pretty well. Starts with the logo and goes to header and everything's fine. So that's nice. That's not always the way it's going to be, especially if you have multiple columns, multiple things going on. Oh, here is an example of where we're a little off. Oh, well, number one is the image. And you said, can you remove that stuff, right? So, yes, so I can go in here, and I can right-click on it, and I can delete selected item from structure. Boom. But note, it took it off of here. So for some reason, this might be an image instead of text, is what might be going on here. But, so you just have to do that with the items you would want to not be seen, or you can archive them and stuff like that. But basically, if it's not showing up grayed like this in the order panel, it will not be announced to a screen reader.
Archiving and just removing it from documents. Like we scanned documents or looked at and done the test, and we have tons of these straight elements. No idea what to do with them in order. They're just like what you were showing. They're just like blank little squares that have nothing in them.
Yeah, basically, they were probably either hard returns, because hard returns do show up, or they were somebody put in a spacer or something behind the scenes or something. But the only problem with deleting it from the order structure is that you then also have to delete it from the tagged, because it doesn't do it automatically for both. So you would have to do it individually for each one. If you archive, it then kind of removes it from the structure, but it's still there. You don't have to do it in both sections, because it knows to do it in both sections. Does that make sense? And we have 7 minutes, right? So does anybody have any questions about PDFs? Or do I have longer than that?
Take as long as you want.
Oh, thanks.
You can sit here for the next hour if you want.
Oh, cool. Okay, I go to 3:45. Awesome. Okay, cool. Woohoo! All right. So, okay. Now, the other thing to note is what I have here is kind of it's good structure, but it's not the best. This is going to be helpful, but it's not amazing. And I say that because in my tags right now, everything is just one dump of information, even though there are 2 pages of information here. So, in reality, and again, this is I'm working with a document right now that if we pretend we never did any of the good stuff that we did in Microsoft Word or InDesign. So this is basically remediation, okay? So if you have a document out there that exists and you don't have the original file, you have to do stuff like this. So what you would start with is you would want to create a new tag, and that popped over on my screen. Give me a second. A new tag. And the new tag drop-down list has several types. There is a page on Adobe's website, and I'm going to pop this over for you too. Adobe has really helpful stuff about remediating, I will tell you that. And on this page, which is called Edit Document Structure with the Content and Tags panel, so sexy headline, guys. So if you scroll down on this, get down to the bottom of the page, it tells you what each one of those tags means and what it's used for. So some of them don't make a lot of hill of beans sense, right? Because you've got, which one am I on? I'm in here. That drop down that we were just looking at says article, it says caption, it says document, it says figure, form, heading label. We get heading labels, right? But then when we get a little further down, it's got section and span. And what's the difference between those two? Why would I use one instead of the other? So go to that Adobe resource and read up on all of it. But basically, the best thing to start with, from what I was reading, is that you want to start with a part. Okay, so part is basically the same as if it were a page, and then literally, to make your tags kind of like HTML, you're able to give it a label. So here you can call it page 1. Okay, and then now that you have your page 1 tag, you can drag it in the structure up to the top, and you can put all the items that belong on page 1 in page 1. Okay. So now when I click on page 1, all of the items on page 1 are highlighted. Now I know, oh, okay, there's some organization there. The screen reader is going to understand all of those items are grouped together. If we were looking at a document that's more of a newsletter, and within this page it has 3 articles or sections, we can also add another tag that's called article or section. So new tag, come over here, and we would add section, and then you could call it the title of that article. So, can't spell sideways. Sorry. So, Article 1. And then you would just put everything that's related to Article 1 in that section. And see, this is painful, and it goes on like this forever. Now, if you're working in InDesign, the great news about InDesign is InDesign has a stories panel that allows you to do all of this work where things are grouped together on an articles page. Excuse me, something got in my throat. You can group all the items together. That includes things like the images, any hyperlinks that are associated with it, basically any tags you think that would have to be a part of it, those can all be already grouped in InDesign. This is another reason to leverage your businesses to maybe have you move over to InDesign to help with this. Okay, so super complicated. A couple things to remember. With the order panel, you have the ability to right-click it and go to, document properties. Wait. Oh, goodness, where is that order panel? Huh. Oh, it's over here. Wrong. Stupid split level. Okay, so if I'm on the order panel, I have the numbers, and I can click on it and go to reading order. Where's reading order? Sorry. Okay. Well, basically, what I was going to say is that in this panel, if you came across something that didn't exist, and you wanted it to exist, you can highlight it, and you can change it in here to be a header 1 or you can change it to be an artifact, you can change it to be a header, a paragraph, all kinds of stuff like that. So you can do that within the reading order panel. And the tagging we talked about. Oh, the key thing to note is that sometimes if you're dragging and dropping things in this order panel, you might see things disappear. Don't be alarmed. I mean, be alarmed because it's going to be a pain to fix. But there's no back button in the reading order and tags panel. So if something messes up, best thing to do is to quit and open the last version you saved. So I've become compulsive about saving about every 2 or 3 actions that I do in here because something generally messes up. And what I mean by messes up is whenever you have a document that you've used a lot of structural elements to build in InDesign and Word, this happens if you use a table to have a data table formatted and you used bandings in the rows. Whenever you try and change things here, it actually changes the layering within this file. And sometimes the content that you saw just a moment ago falls behind a graphic. It's still there. The good news is it's still there. It's just now behind a graphic. There's 2 ways to solve it. Either quit and do it again and try not to have that happen, or you can go into editing the text within this document and move the item back in front of. You can use the layering here, but it's a pain. So just keep that in mind, save often, save often. And so no back button, no undo. There's no way to automate this unless you have some helper software. There are remediation, 2 products out there that I know of that help with remediating. So if you have a lot of documents that you don't have the original files for and you would have to do all this for them, I recommend either using Common Look or Equidocs. Common Look is just how it sounds. Equidocs is EQUIDOC.
One more time, sorry.
EQUIDOC. Or maybe DOCS, but they both offer subscription packages. I've worked with both of these programs. They will take the remediation time that you have to do in Adobe Pro and cut it in half, maybe even down to a quarter of the time, just depending on how complicated the document was that you're working with. It's very easy. It's got slider bars. It's got easy ways to select text. With Equidocs, it will output accessible PDF. It will output accessible HTML. So if you have a document that stinks and you want to have the most accessible version, you can export it into HTML, turn it into a web page. But if you do want to keep it as a PDF, it also offers the ability to export as a PDF. I do not work for either of those companies, but I do endorse them because I have used them and they're very good. Actually, not that expensive either. Most of them don't charge by the document. They charge by some kind of other factors out there in the world. I'm not sure. And if you sweet talk them, you can tend to get a free trial and give it a little try and pass it around the organization. Whoever's originating the document should probably have access to that, but I know how small a lot of your areas are, so you might have to take on this hat as well. I apologize. But yeah, that's about the only way it's going to get any better. If you do want full-on how to become an Adobe Acrobat Accessibility Pro, Adobe offers 3-day classes to get into the nitty-gritty of all this and to do it really well and have it be spotless. And if you haven't heard of a conference called CSUN, CSUN is an annual conference that is held in California by California State University. It's a technology conference. It's over the course of like 3 or 4 days in, I think it's March or May. Anyway, Adobe comes to that every year and does those classes there. So I think sometimes they're an extra cost pre-session kind of thing, and then they'll do a couple half-day workshops. So I recommend those if you really want to get into this. But if you do, I apologize.
Yeah, the tools.
The
besides those two, any others that you may have tried that you didn't like?
Actually, those are the only two I know of, but it was a kind of a thing where I was Common Look and Equidox are the only two I know of for remediating. There might be tons of other ones out there, but those are the only ones I've actually encountered.
PDF, LIB?
No. He mentioned something called PDF LIB. Yeah. Try Googling that and see if, if you have to have 3 vendors for a contract, there you go. You got your 3 vendors to evaluate.
By the way, Equidox is with an X. I think.
It's an X. Thank you. Thank you, guys. And it's based, it's not US, right? Or is it US?
No, it's equidox.co.
CO.
EQUIDOX.co.
Okay. All right, so does anybody have any questions? I know, it's terribly overwhelming. Yes, sir?
Okay, so, it's, I don't know how to say this in a way that's not going to sound like a jerk.
Just say you're amongst friends.
What is the minimum I can get away with
Okay.
if I have to do
No, I get it.
1,000 of these?
Right. What is the minimum you have to do?
What's the bare minimum that I can do without being sued?
Fair enough. That's a reasonable question. What's the bare minimum you have to do if you have 1,000 PDFs? I think the same thing can be asked if I have 10,000 videos. What is the bare minimum I can do to make them accessible? And unfortunately, the answer is that you just have to work at it, and you just have to show progress. So a lot of places get dinged because they're not doing anything. Literally, they don't have an accessibility policy on their site. They are not showing any progress whatsoever in even acknowledging that accessibility is a thing. So if you acknowledge it and have a policy on your site, that's going to lower your risk. And then if you can say, we're going to work on the documents that people are actually clicking on. I'd love to use analytics for this. Which document did people click on last month the most? Let's start there. And then let's go back 6 months and what were they clicking on then? And then once you get to the 500th document that nobody has clicked on in 6 months, then start asking people, why do we have it on our site? Why does it exist out there and we have to be liable for it if nobody is even looking at it? So analytics go a long way.
Let's say you're faced with that bunch of PDFs, would you recommend opening them in something like MS Word and then doing what you said and then saving it back to PDF or remediating in Adobe?
I don't know if anybody has ever tried to open a PDF in Microsoft Word. It's pretty awful. It's terrible. A lot of things get misplaced and just get lost in that kind of translation. The thing to remember is you're talking about 2 software companies, Microsoft Word and Adobe, completely different. They're developed by different people, so they don't talk that well to each other in general. Luckily, they have been working very hard on this accessibility thing for it to go one way, but not the other way. So I would never recommend opening a PDF or converting a PDF to Microsoft Word and then trying it. I would try the remediation that you can do. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
The newer versions of Microsoft can make their documents into a PDF.
Correct.
Are they compatible with Adobe?
Yes. Definitely. There's 3 ways to save. You can do save as PDF or export to PDF, or then there's a little converter thing that you can do that's called Adobe Acrobat Creator or whatever. So, but all 3 of those work. You just want to make sure that in all of them you're looking for that option that says make accessible and tagged. Tagged is the big word we're looking for. Sometimes some of those options, some of those ways that we're converting don't allow us to have the option for tagged. So just give it a shot with all of them. In the back. Oh, sir first. Yes, sir first. I'm sorry.
Just as a takeaway, I guess, so your best bet if you have to go back and do these is if you have the original Microsoft documents, you go through that, go through the steps that you discussed. Then you still have to bring it into
Adobe
accessibility and do the accessibility check, correct?
Correct.
is that pretty much it as far as the fixes that you would need for listing?
That's a really good place to start. I will tell you, heartbreakingly so, that my previous job at Sight Improve, I worked with two people who were visually impaired, one blind, one low vision. The gentleman who had low vision could get through most of it, and it was okay. The gentleman who was blind, I spent 8 hours on a document that in other words, I was doing remediation. I didn't have the original document, and I spent 8 hours adding all the tags and everything I could do, and he still didn't, it still wasn't the best experience, right? But he was able to hobble his way through it. He could get through it. He could understand what steps were involved and everything like that. But I felt bad that it was so much harder for him to get through that document. So, yes, you're right, though. Everything you said, completely correct. If you can, try to do user testing, every once in a while on some of your more popular, like if you have a fishing license or something that everybody's downloading all the time, and you know that that's hitting the most people, see if you can get somebody in just to test it out for you. A lot of times, that community is so happy to help you make something accessible, they'll do it just for a smile, so. Ma'am.
Are there additional things you have to do if it's like a billable form?
Oh my gosh, yes. So basically, there's an entire, good news, bad news. Good news is that if you ever have a form online and it's in PDF, you can add basically almost all the same things that you can add in HTML. You can have placeholder text, you can have tool tips, you can have even error prevention, all in those fields within this PDF. Problem is, it takes a lot of work to do it. And in my mind, if you're going to spend that much time on a document, why aren't you creating an interactive HTML page? Why? And I understand it's resources and we don't have developers. I get it, but oh my gosh. Yeah, it's a pain. And again, you have to do things like, you have to think a little further than you do online, because a lot of times when we have the forms that I'm most familiar with are ones that will have your name and then your spouse's name and then your kids' names. Now, if you think about that, each one of those form fields would say first name, last name, first name, last name, first name, last name. In the PDF, you have to make sure that each one of those is unique. So it's, applier's first name, last name, applier's spouse's first name, last name, applier's first child, first name, last name. So it's just got to be so much more individual and unique. So I would recommend HTML. But yes, and there's also, as part of the wizard, there is a check for forms. So it gives you the option, will you check my form to make sure it's accessible? And it does that. It kind of checks those labels. And I think we have 4 minutes. Is there any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So for historical documents, and we had an effort to digitize clerk and recorder documents from the late 1800s. What the heck do you do with those things?
Oh my gosh, that's a really good one.
You figured it out yet?
No. We had microfiche. We had the same thing. We had microfiche that we had to convert, and it's a scan thing and a boom and a boom. I think in those cases, you kind of have to look at the users and who is the user for that? Who is your user group and who is the target? And then you have to possibly come up with some language that says, hey, if you are someone who needs this information, we apologize that we can't get to this right now. Give us a call at this number, have it be your cell, and they can call you on the way, whatever it is, so that you can just let them know, look, we haven't just abandoned you and said you're not allowed to look at this information. We would love to make this accessible, but we also have other priorities we have to do. And
Our attorneys and our director of disabilities break down on it. They're like, we will do absolutely everything else we can, and we do have a priority 1, 2, 3 schedule for all of our documents.
Right.
Based on analytics. But we were like, there's a certain point where you have, old-fashioned signatures on marriage licenses from 1902.
Exactly. And Why? Yeah, but, so yeah, no, that's the best. And again, you do kind of have to fall back to whatever your organization feels comfortable with, but from the perspective of where I've been, we either have limited the information that we're allowing the public to see, or we've provided some kind of message that says, just give us a call, here's an email address, we'll work with you and try and get it accessible within 24 hours or something.
That's what I was wondering is, have you heard anything from the DOJ or people who work with the DOJ on what their opinion is for that?
Well, they definitely, the DOJ does consider documents part of digital accessibility.
Right.
So,
that's why, and they're like 100%, and they
Yeah.
machines about it.
but I'm not sure that they have a ruling of how old it has to be. Yes, ma'am?
I thought, don't take me legally on this, but I thought there was verbiage in there somewhere for archived records that you're no longer updating or maintaining.
There's definitely a legacy policy in Section 508, and the legacy policy is generally about a technology that you're not updating. So in the where I used to work, we had a very old PeopleSoft system that was so ancient, we couldn't make it accessible because it literally didn't accept coding for like HTML5, you know, like it was really old, HTML2 or something. And so as long as we never touched anything about that system, we were allowed to say it was legacy. But they really kind of, the way that I've read it, and I'm not legal either, but the way I've read it is it's more an application-based, not a document. But you're right, that's a good question that I can look into for you. But yeah, there is a legacy part, so that might be something you can leverage with your legal department. Anybody else? Yes, sir. I do want to thank you guys for a little bit of my technical difficulty and for being here today. And please come back. This is a great conference. Thanks, guys.